So welcome to Straight Talk. Once again, we're back together, and I'm glad to have you as a viewing audience as well. I have a very special guest today. We're going to get back to that in just a moment. But I do want to say that it's been very busy in Frankfurt. I mean, extremely busy in Frankfurt. And this is the time, you heard about folks referring to making laws and policies in the legislatures like making sausage. Well, this is what they call sausage time because so much is flying from the House to the Senate and back to the from the Senate to the House and back and forth, and it's only going to get more intense. This is where bills that you thought weren't going to move are going to move, and bills that you think are moving are going to die, and that all happens in this mix. But there are some things I did want to pull out just a little bit. I thought I'd bring your attention to, and one is this piece, the piece we passed out of the Senate that I co-sponsored regarding the Louisville Civilian Review Board subpoena power. I know you've been keeping up with that from week to week. This question of the Civilian Review Board is critical. The Metro Council actually have passed legislation that establishes a Civilian Review Board, but a very key element of it is its independence, its ability to have subpoena power on its own, as opposed to having it in the political mix, which basically is happening now. It doesn't mean it's not workable. It can be, but you got the politics in it, and that's not what we're doing here. So we passed a measure that actually, when the subpoena power or the Civilian Review Board makes a request for information and someone doesn't comply with that, then they can go straight to the circuit court. And now you have a judge, which should give some trust and validity to the action. He can review it. And in any situation, by the way, where someone doesn't comply with a subpoena request, it's going to end up in circuit court anyway. So why not have the Civilian Review Board to go straight to it? There's another bill on the House side, and it had a nonpartisan provision in terms of the mayoral elections. I've been told that's going to be taken out. Of course, that bill may prevail as opposed to this bill. So we'll see how that plays out. That's one thing. That's Senate Bill 247. You want to keep an eye on that. Then there is a House Bill 208 that's come over to the Senate regarding public schools. And the key thing I want you to remember about this one, I think it's probably more on the positive side than the negative. It has some restrictive parts that I didn't really agree with, but the schools still would have the option to operate under a hybrid model where students spend part of the week attending in-person classes and the rest from home. So the fact of the matter is that they have at least some flexibility. We know we are trying to, the key point there is you want to maintain safety, but at the same time, we know that at least the reports I'm receiving and what they're saying is that some of our students are losing ground, and it's more effective if it's in person. However, we can't discount the safety factor. Teachers are involved in that mix. Teachers have to be safe. Children, they say, don't get infected as much with COVID. However, they can take it home to older folks who are very vulnerable until we get herd immunity and vaccinations all around. So that's an issue. One more I want to bring up. The Senate Bill 270, we passed the Senate. And keep in mind, this bill has not passed the House. Senate Bill 270 is one that allows Simmons College to produce board certified teachers and makes them eligible for Kentucky tuition grants. That's very important to the mission of Simmons, who's doing great work down there in the community. It has an amendment. Well, I'll say this. It has an amendment associated with it that was put on that bill, which I also support because it broadens the abilities of Simmons to deal with wraparound and support services in the community and around the institution itself. So that's going to, if that can get through the House, and we'll see, that would be a really strong move. Might seem small to you, but I'm gonna tell you, it's a door opener with respect to that. So having said that, let's get to the main part of why we're here today. I have a very special guest, and his name is Jecorey Arthur. He's the Louisville Metro Councilman, the newest, I think, one of the newest. Welcome, Jecorey. How are you? I'm Gerald, you Jecorey. Let's go with that, okay?
Peace. What's going on? You can call me Jecorey, Councilman. I'm a teacher, professor at Simmons. Shout out to our local HBCU.
Get out of here.
And here's the councilman now.
Yeah, well, let me get this straight now. You a teacher. You an artist. And that, when I say artist, I'm talking about music, that whole genre. And you are a Metro Councilman. So you're doing a whole lot of things. You're wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, we'll get into this. I think they're all tied together and kind of led me to where I am today in terms of political work.
Yeah. Well, I've been viewing you. We've been interacting more and more, but a lot of folks are asking the question: who is Jecorey Arthur? Where did he come from? What is he thinking? Where does he want us to go? I'm gonna open this up to you. You can start anywhere you want to.
This young man's mother had him when she was 15 years old. This young man didn't have a man to hold or help him mold. This young man was surrounded by low self-esteem, high crime and low self-esteem. This young man lived a nightmare until he had a dream. This young man dreamt of better days, better ways, and better times. Barely could write a paragraph, but wanted to rewrite the paradigm. This young man joined his school's band and banded together hope, taught his brothers to love each other. You don't have to hustle dope. This young man used hip hop to make a symphony of peace. If it wasn't for his teachers, he'd be victim to the streets. This young man got a music scholarship and went to college, graduated twice and traded nonsense for knowledge. This young man performs and teaches across the nation. This young man knew music could save lives and now he's living validation. This young man comes from the same hood as Muhammad Ali. This young man is with you now because this young man is me. And that's who I am. I am Jecorey, born, raised, and proudly still living in the west end of Louisville, originally from the Parkland neighborhood where Muhammad Ali is from. But I've also lived in Portland. I've lived in Shawnee and now I live in Russell, just west of downtown. I'm an artist known as 1200. I make hip hop music as well as classical music. And sometimes I fuse those genres together, which we'll get into today. I'm known as Mr. Arthur in schools, community centers, libraries, boys and girls clubs, anywhere there's youth to reach and teach. I'm also known as Professor Arthur at our local HBCU, and I've also done some work with other colleges such as the University of Louisville, where I graduated from, and surrounding colleges. And I'm Councilman Arthur as of January this year, and I'm here to take everything that I've been rapping about and singing about and teaching about and actually do something about it through political change in a way that you've been working through political change really before I was born, thinking about your career. So I think I'm an extension, I'm a continuation of the work that you have established here in the political world in Kentucky.
Yeah, I would make one correction on that. We are working together in the same space after the same things, but I'm gonna tell you something you just did, and I got to tell you that was impressive. That took me back a little bit. Didn't know you was gonna do that. I caught every bit of that in that presentation. You did it creatively. You did it as a matter of that was an artistic expression, but you was telling the story of your life. That was impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, that's how I introduced myself on the campaign. It kind of threw people off. They be like, "Who is this guy?" Yeah, but I mean, this is just like that's who I am. I think to a certain extent, like me announcing that I would run and go from like this identity of like a musician / teacher to politician, it threw some people off. But I'm the same exact person I was before January 4th when I got sworn in. Now I just, I got a different title in front of my name, but I'm still about that same work, helping our people.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you. You said you had this dream. When was that? Can you pinpoint it? Was it an evolution? Was it an epiphany or a process?
So in the 5th grade, going into the double digit ages from like 9 to 10 to 11, I saw the movie Drumline and I joined my school's band, and I quickly noticed that making music was a way to like keep me out of trouble, keep my mind stimulated. I didn't have time to be on the streets because I was practicing my instrument. I didn't have time to be in a gang because my gang was the school band. And I used that as a mechanism to pull my friends out of some of the paths that they were going down, saying, come play this instrument, come play drums, let's produce music, let's write music, let's rap, let's do this. So that was a vehicle for me, so to speak, to kind of save us from a life that we were surrounded by. I think that music oftentimes gets pinned as self-expression, but I've realized it's also self-discovery, and you can really find who you are in that music. And that's something that I've just used throughout the years. And I'm definitely still an artist at heart, an artist, professionally. And I look forward to bringing that onto the priorities of the Metro Council. But if it wasn't for music, I wouldn't be here today. So I definitely attribute not only the performing arts, but also like educationally, and my teachers saving me and giving me that outlet that was so important in my life. And that's what really sparked me to be a teacher, because I wanted to return that favor to the youth that look like me and live where I live.
Wow, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you and I'm saying, dang, I've heard this before. I've lived this before. I've seen this before. Let me run this one to you.
Okay.
So you probably didn't know that I was brought up in music.
Mm.
I was brought up in music, 8th grade. I started on a clarinet and I played it, let's say all the way through Kentucky State University, and played first chair first, clarinet, B-flat clarinet, and was pretty good with it, quite frankly. And then, of course, I abandoned it. My God, I got busy and I can't, my armature, I can't even keep it right, to do that piece now. But another piece, the teaching piece. The teaching piece, I've taught at Simmons for a number of years, taught at University of Louisville, adjunct a number of years. So we got that parallel going. The political piece, you are now a legislator. I'm a legislator for a term. And I'm looking at this, I'm saying, wow, this is interesting in terms of these connections. I bet there's more.
Right. I mean, we in the West.
More, I know it's
right.
coming.
I mean, you like even just like where we're from, you know what I mean, and what we're about, like being in the West end of Louisville, So I think there's so many connections, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, because what does that look like for? And that's why I said continuation earlier. We're still doing the collaboration, but the continuation piece is important.
Right.
The collaboration makes that continuation happen, because when you're running a relay race, you got to pass that baton off.
Right.
So we're in a situation right now where it's like, I'm learning everything that you have accomplished, everything that you're working on, and we're trying to be as efficient, as effective as possible. And I can't do what I need to do if I don't know where you've already been, where like something might have failed, where you have learned from something. So this connection is incredibly important. I don't think that I could succeed if we didn't make this connection.
Let me make a point on that, because you might be surprised about this, or some of the listeners may be surprised about this. Some of those in my generation will look back, a young person like yourself. What, you're 28, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, someone as young as you are, as well. Heck, I was in the legislature before you were born. I mean, you really put it in context. But guess what? The fact of the matter is, and what I have grown to really understand in sharp relief, is that I'm learning from you. And I'm not just talking about you, I'm talking about from your generation. Because the realization a lot of people my age may or may not realize, I know some that don't, is that you're living in a space and time at an age and with dynamics that we didn't deal with in that particular context that you master. I'm talking about technology. I'm talking about there's a whole lot of things that we could talk about like that. So I find myself, my son is roughly your age, yourself and others like that. I'm talking to people like you all the time, young people, and I'm learning something every day. So I applaud this, and this is encouraging to hear this. I don't want to jump too quick, because I asked you to bring a little bit of stuff, because I want to see some more of your artistry and your creativity. But what have I not asked that you might want to express about who is Jecorey Arthur? Have I missed anything? Have you had your opportunity?
For the most part, I loved, after we look at some of the art, to get into the solutions to the problems that we know, the problems that so many people talk about. They live those problems. Kind of get into what it looks like to solve them through legislation before we hop off of here, for sure.
Okay, so one key question then. Let's make a transition here. What is it about your art? What is it about your creativity that informs you in terms of what you do, in terms of your commitment to the community and your what you see as your role in moving the community forward?
I'll talk about the evolution of my music making and how it kind of got to where I am, because I really at a young age just started off just kind of observing, watching music, from the church, the live music in the church, to my family who had a studio in their basement, and really encouraged me to save up my money and try to get my own studio. And that's where 1200 came from. I was nicknamed after the first studio I purchased. So just watching music kind of opened up the door to where I am today. And from there, I went into making music, producing it. And that naturally positioned me to teach music, from teaching my homies in the streets, how to make beats and how to write songs and whatnot, to teaching in the classroom. And then from teaching, because teachers are organizers, that led me to organizing. And when you think about music organizing, it's anything from organizing the event itself, organizing to make sure we get artists paid and get them gigs, organizing to make sure that they have access to something like Forecastle, where I have organized a West Louisville showcase, where artists like us were never felt like they had a place in this, world-renowned music festival. And then from that point, I realized, if you can organize a music event, you can organize a festival, you can organize anything. You can organize students in a concert, you can organize anything from a coat drive to a drive or a campaign around legislation, whatever. So now I'm at a point where I'm just organizing. So from watching music to making music to teaching music to organizing music to just organizing is kind of how that bridged me to where I am today. Now, in terms of how that impacts me as a legislator, of course, the organizing experience, but like artists, they are creative without boundaries. And that means that when I'm up here and I'm legislating and I'm thinking about solutions, I think oftentimes, like as adults, and this, me being young has to do with this too. I think sometimes we get caught up in, can we do that? And I'm thinking about, how can we do that? And that's the difference between me as an artist with my mindset compared to some of the other legislators. They might say, we tried this and we can't do it, but I'm trying to figure out how to navigate and get to a point where you can do it. So I think that's what sets me apart from most people as an artist when it comes to being a legislator.
Well, I noticed something else about you. That very well said, by the way. But I noticed something else too. You express yourself in artistic terms. You present yourself in artistic terms. I've observed you in other situations. And these are things obviously have been thought out as well. They're not just, they may appear spontaneous to people, but I have to, just knowing this whole piece, these are thoughtful kind of comments that are being made, intentional. But I'm seeing that in that context, so that's going to serve you well. It's going to connect you well. So, do want to ask you another question before we get into this other piece about Simmons. What now? You doing music at Simmons? You teaching music at Simmons, or what's?
I do teach music. I'm a professor of percussion studies. So any student that's playing percussion instruments, and those are instruments that you strike, like the drums, you scrape, like a gorero, or some drums or some keyboard instruments, or any instrument that you shake, like maracas, you are coming through me, so to speak. If you want to be a professional percussionist, whether you're on the drum line or you're in the back of the orchestra, they study with me, they take courses with me. And I'm also working on our community education and outreach programming, from organizing our Black Metro Council members to come and speak to the students, to making sure that people are aware of what's happening at Simmons, to helping fundraise for Simmons. Anything community outreach I'm a part of as well at the college.
Wow, extraordinary. Simmons, just a commentary on Simmons. Some may, many do know that Simmons has not only what it does now, it has the potential of just being a tremendous, tremendous force in the community, particularly as it relates to those that look like you and me. And I'm saying that's one of those. Simmons is a jewel in this community, and it's growing and it's emerging, and it deserves all the attention and support we can give it. But I'm getting ready to turn this over to you. I want to see this creative side. We can come back to some of this stuff, about issues and so forth. I'm going to turn this over to you, and why don't you just pop up what you want, explain it, maybe give whatever your expression you want to be, and it's yours. Go for it.
All right, so I'll play just a few examples, some excerpts of some music that I've made over the years to kind of talk about my creative side. This first piece is very much so like of the hip hop genre. It also incorporates a wide range of Black musical influences, because if you didn't know, Black music is American music and vice versa, you know, from rock and roll to R&B to hip hop to disco, pop even. This music is our music. It started on plantations. So you'll very, very much so hear some spiritual influences. You'll hear the rap influence. You'll hear a little bit of rock in here. This is a song called Mama Please. I collaborated with some artists in Chicago and Buffalo with, and it's a reflection of what we went through last year. And I'll just play about 1 minute or so of the excerpt, and you'll kind of see how it goes throughout Louisville and goes throughout some of the problems, but also talks about some of the solutions.
George had a mother. I think of Brianna. She could have been one. No, she should have been one. But instead of a mother, she done turned into a martyr. We never chose these parents. They turned me into an author. They got a knee on our neck. I got a foot on their neck. They gotta deal with it death. They gotta cut us a check. From Brianna's law to Carrier's law, I dare you to draw. My area's raw. Youngest can dream on, from Iman to beyond. They must have forgotten everything we on.
So again, just like really painting a picture of what we went through last year and what we were trying to see on the other side of it. You know, George had a mama. I think of Brianna. She could have been one. No, she should have been one. So making a parallel with them, and then talking about from Brianna's law to Carrier's law. Carrier's a sister in Buffalo. She was an officer who stopped the man from getting killed. He was being choked, just like George Floyd was suffocating, being choked. She stopped him and she got fired and she faced some consequences. So there's such a through line with what's happening all across the world. And this song kind of reflected that through art. That's my hip hop side. And I'll jump into my classical side a little bit. In this video, I'm playing an electronic vibraphone, and you'll hear some like accompaniment from my friend Kojin Toshiro on his violin, but this also has like a fusion element to it, because I'm playing a classical-esque instrumentation, but I'm playing a spiritual, and that spiritual is Go Down Moses. And I'll play an excerpt of this going into another hip hop song, just a little bit of it though. And for anyone unfamiliar with Go Down Moses, this is a spiritual, literally saying, let my people go. So demanding for freedom. And it transitions into a song where I'm talking about mass incarceration, which again is a reflection of letting my people go, people who are in chains, a modern day form of
This
slavery.
song is called Decades. And it's a story about a young black man who got mixed up into the system.
And as you can see, I got my No More, No Knock shirt on. So using the music also as a way to campaign
Right.
for political change. And then the last piece I'll share is just an excerpt from a symphony, Tchaikovsky, who's a Russian composer, but fused with Drake's music, hip hop music, R&B music, pop, American music. And I'll play just an excerpt of me playing percussion and also rapping with this orchestra. This is the Pittsburgh Symphony, one of the top tier orchestras in our country.
Playing games, no control. How much money? We talking Oprah, Rhea, flip it now. figured out. She's acting different now. Now you singing a different sound.
And you know, I have plenty of excerpts of what that looks like online, but like from making the hip hop music to making the classical music to fusing them together and anything in between, really, that's kind of my musical outlet in a nutshell.
Wow, that's powerful. That's how I just saw you in a way I've never seen you before. That's the first I've seen of this. Only thing I haven't seen you do bluegrass. What's that about?
I mean, I got a banjo over here, and I ain't gonna do that.
Maybe you'll get there someday. Okay. Wow, that's the protest piece is very interesting. Of course, I know you've been involved in that. Of course, what is your view of? Well, let's look at it from two standpoints. What was your view of that going into it? I know you went into it. I don't know how you went into it. I can understand how you would go into it. But from your perspective, what was that to you? And then secondly, if you will, what do you see now? You know, you've had an experience, you're viewing it, you've even gone into another role since that began, right? What do you see now? So then and now.
The protest were reactive. If I had to summarize them with one word, they were reactive. And where I am now is less about being reactive and more about being proactive. What can we put in place to prevent this from happening again, to prevent something worse from happening again? That's where my mind is. And when I think about protest, I think about going back to that music side of me. I think about that as a form of promotion. It's how you market something, you know, in the form of like music. I might be marketing for you to come to a concert, for you to come to an event, or for you to purchase an album. The protest, you're marketing about the change. But I think to a certain extent over the summer, some people got caught up in the protest thinking the protest was the change, as opposed to the protest marketing the change, as opposed to the protest being a part of a larger campaign. And I think back to Dr. King's direct action steps, which I've like kind of taken and remixed on my own to create 10 steps that include a number of ways to get to political change. One being communicate, where you just simply talk about the issue, which some people do that and then never do anything else. 2, educate, where you dive into details about that issue. You understand, you break it down. Why is it happening? How is it happening? 3, you collaborate. You work with other people across that issue, across those solutions to identify what needs to happen to address it. And sometimes we fail at that point in terms of collaboration. We don't want to work with other people for whatever reason. 4, you delegate, which is incredibly important because you just saw in that orchestra, you had the string section, the brass section, the percussionists, you had the woodwinds, you had the conductor, you had me. Not everyone plays the same role. So delegation is incredibly important. 5, you activate. You go out and you do what you say you're going to do in terms of next steps through that political process. 6, you agitate. And I would say that's the protest more than anything. But notice that agitation was 6. So you skipped all the education, collaboration, and delegation bits, and you just jumped straight to agitate. And there's, you know, you put the cart before the horse. 7, you negotiate, working with the Gerald Neals of the world, the Jecorey Arthurs of the world to talk through some of that legislation. After you talk through it and you get it down packed to where you need to be after that outreach, 8, you actually legislate it. You write it into law to make it permanent. 9, you regulate. You reassess and make sure that it's working. And then 10, after all of that's said and done, you communicate, you educate, you collaborate, delegate, activate, agitate, negotiate, legislate, regulate. 10, after all of it's said and done, which some of us have been doing without any of the other steps. 10, you celebrate. And I saw a whole lot of people in the streets marching and having parades and doing backflips over small victories that were not long-term victories. And they skipped all those other steps. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure there's all sorts of other strategies, but that's where I am with it. And when going back to your question, that protest, you skipped a whole bunch of steps before you just went out in the streets yelling. And I was a part of that problem. But now I'm trying to be a part of the solution to address that problem.
You know, that's first of all, wisdom. I think I just heard some wisdom. some thoughtfulness, and I appreciate that. You shouldn't have shared that with me because I'm gonna have to use this. You know what I'm
It's yours.
It's said, so I can't say this better. This is said so well, and it's so logical, and it's simple, it's simplicity. At the same time, it's deep because every one of those things you just said is absolutely true. There's some subsets, of course, but it really is the heart of things. Let me go to something else. I want to compare something, and maybe you've read about this because you mentioned Martin Luther King, for instance. Back in those days, because I see this as a continuum of that, and that what was happening there in the 70s and the 60s was a continuum for what happened before that, and before that, and before that. We all understand that. Some people think they just arrived, but all of us are standing on the continuum of history, dealing with the realities of the moment, quite frankly, stacked on top of that history. But here's my point. Back then, there was a lot of planning, there was a lot of educating, there was a lot of communicating, there was some reacting, like now, but it was well planned. And I noticed in this one, it seemed they used the word organic. I kept hearing the word organic. And then I realized there was multiple leaders involved in that. And it was hard for me to make sense of that other than I agreed with the reasons for, it was justified, that sort of thing. But also, guess what else it did? Regardless of those things that led up to agitate, it opened the door to get to legislate.
Right.
Agitate and legislate. Guess what's going on right now? It's been going on because of that protest, negotiation. So this is well laid out. But as you were saying it, I was holding myself in my seat. I said, yeah, because as you know, protests alone, it does have its role, but it has to translate into policy at some point in order to sustain it. And that's hard. That's hard stuff. That's very hard stuff. But you also talk about collaborate. That's always been a problem. I can remember back in the past when folks put themselves on the line like folks are doing now in a different sort of way, that it wasn't like everybody had a kumbaya and let's all go. Not all the ministers were together on the issue behind Martin Luther King. Some of them wish he didn't show up in Louisville, Kentucky, when he did. Follow me?
Right.
So you always got that. But when the leadership doesn't come together, that's after the same thing, I think that's where the weakness is. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. Because you have to think about the flip side of that. If we're supposed to be on the same team and you're fighting each other, you're essentially scoring in the other team's basket. And what happens when you do that? They get the point. Or in this case, like they advance what they're trying to do and we don't advance what we're trying to do. So that collaboration piece is so important. Any of those pieces you could say are more important than the other. But if you can't sit down and at least have a conversation and come to a common understanding, at least get on the same page or at least the same book,
yeah,
we can't get anything accomplished.
End up in the same neighborhood somewhere, right?
Right. But you brought up an important point because you were talking about, we jumped to the agitation. Now we're doing the legislation. And this is hypothetical. I'm wondering how much more effective we could be at legislating something if we were more efficient with the process to get to legislation, because there was some organic organizing in the streets. But what if it wasn't as just random? What if it was like very intentional? What would that mean for you? Would that make your work easier? Would that make my work easier? And part of that is on us in the streets, but another part of that is on something we talked about. How do our elders take responsibility for that failure of passing the baton? Or when do we know you need to pass the baton? Because, it took me a long time in life before I got to talk to the Dr. Kevin Cosbys of the world, to the Senator Gerald Neals of the world. Before I got to where I am today, where were these conversations being had so that we didn't drop the ball and we didn't get so reactive and we could strategize more?
But guess what? We're having that conversation now.
Absolutely.
And let me tell you something. it's not a smooth process. You know, we have a tendency to think that, you know, 1, 2 comes after 1 and 3 comes after 2. Actually, there are all kinds of confluences of dynamics that some dominant things prevail and some subsets you never even sense or are aware of that actually determine outcomes. There's all kinds of quiet discussions. There's all kinds of interactions. There's all kinds of connections, but you don't see them. And what you see, and I think that's what happens with human beings, and I mean all human beings, me included. You go off of what you know, what you think, and you build and react and act off of that, and how you informed, right? So you can't be informed by everything. For instance, I was in a conversation the other evening, and someone asked the question, well, why didn't you let us know? Why didn't you ask us a question? I've been engaged in discussions with multiple people for over months, asking them questions to even form where I am. That's a different process from someone calling a meeting and saying, you know, we call the meeting, come tell us what you're doing, ask us, let us get our input that way. That's a different process. Another different process is that the person that's the actor observes dynamics that are taking place. Another process is someone sees you doing something and they approach you and say, hey, look, I don't know, but you might want to consider this. So there's a whole lot of processes that are taking place. And I think as human beings, we have a tendency to think that, you know, I'm right, or you know, this is my space, or you should have. And that's kind of the, you know, that's kind of the thing that as we mature and we engage in these processes, you got to give some room in that piece. So I'm saying all that to say this to you. I think there's a lot of dynamics you just can't put all into this piece. The key thing you said to me is, how do we collaborate? Because I say this all the time. I say it on the show all the time. You know what our greatest weakness is? In my view, our greatest weakness, and I'm talking about Black community now, is our disorganization. Think about it. We have organizations that do great work. We have tremendous talent in this state, in Louisville, Kentucky, across the United States of America. But you know, there's certain things inside a particular institutional arrangement that can't address other things that aren't inside that institutional arrangement. So then it calls for the proper relationship between institutions. They come together to agree on something you said earlier. That's not an easy process. It's a very difficult process because you're busy doing your thing, you know, you're all in on trying to make something happen. What do you think about that? How do you break through that? How do you bring people together?
And that's the difference between noise and music. Music is organized noise. I'm connecting all the dots in our conversation.
Let me make a note right here.
Okay.
So I learned something, Rich.
Right. So going back to what we just said, you got all these organizations, and no disrespect, but in some cases you could just say that's the noise. But what would happen if that in itself was organized in a way? Whether it's the Path Forward group, whether it's a BLM organizer collective group. And even I used the orchestra example earlier. Everyone has a role to play. An issue when it comes to disorganization is sometimes people don't know what their role is, or they think they have a different role. What are you good at? Yeah. Let's start there. You know what I mean? It's like, let's start there and then go from that point. You write law. You've been writing law for decades. That's like, if that's your place, you got to own that space. You got to own it. Maybe somebody else is good at organizing the protests to rally around that law. Maybe somebody else is good at phone banking. They can call, organize to get the legislators called. Whatever your role is, you got to play that role. But we got to have a reality check, look in the mirror at ourselves and realize what type of leader we are. We can all be leaders. The leader you're looking for is in the mirror, but what type of leader are you? Because you can't be everything to everyone. You can't be in every section of the orchestra. And maybe you're not sitting on the podium conducting the orchestra. Maybe you're in the brass section playing that trumpet. Maybe you're playing timpani with me. Whatever the case may be, that's for you to figure out. Maybe collectively we can figure that out for individuals. But if we don't address that, there won't be organization. We'll just continue to have disorganization because we don't know our place in that structure.
I got it. I'm gonna pause. I'm listening to you. I agree with everything you just said. The question is, how do you get there? Now that is becoming aware of where you are and whatever you're doing, right? But how do you actually get there? I'm not asking you to answer that question because I'm gonna tell you, that's the question that everyone is asking throughout history at every moment in time. But I think part of that is that we need to focus on that. I mean, the role playing thing I think is a very important comment that you just made because everybody's not even prepared to do the same thing, and everybody can't do the same thing. So I think that's very important what you just said. I think it's very important. Well, let me ask you this because I think in the scope of things, where are we? And I'm talking about the protest piece now, and then I want to go broader than that because I'm gonna tell you a challenge you're gonna have, my friend. You're gonna have a challenge between being of the community and then representing the community. The way you perceive and the way you translate, the way you move back and forth through that. Not you personally in your own brain, what you're doing. I'm talking about how you perceived. Have you run into that yet? Or at all?
So I have, and I would say specifically looking at Metro Council District 4, what some people might not realize is that the district within itself is a political struggle, let alone having to get 13 other votes on Metro Council to pass a law. I'm in a space where I'm having to try and bring along constituents with me who maybe totally disagree with what the outset looks like. And I'm of the mindset of like the triple evils from Dr. King, fighting poverty from unemployment, homelessness, hunger, and so forth, which I call capitalism. Some people get mad at me about that. Racism, of course, and militarism. I'm fighting those triple evils. And on that fight, there are people, constituents in this district who are fighting against that fight, who are on the opposite side, who are trying to uphold those triple evils. So I find myself, I don't struggle with this because I know who I am and where I come from and what I'm about and what I'm trying to do. But I find myself battling with some of our community members because people think Louisville is so progressive. It's not. When I'm talking about housing people who are living under expressways and in viaducts and in the corners and the shadows of Louisville that feel forgotten about, when I'm talking about housing them and prioritizing them, I get pushback from some of our constituents. We got an email the other day. Somebody said, I pay too much money to see homeless people. And they don't even realize that if we house them, it solves your issue and their issue. So when it comes to like me finding my place in all of this, I go back to those 10 steps. To a certain extent, I have to live in all 10 of those steps. But the most important one I have to do is to legislate. Because out of all 10 of those steps, there are people all across this county who can fulfill any of those needs. But there are only 26 of them who can fulfill those needs in Louisville, Kentucky, and our government. And I'm one of those 26 people. So that's my place. And I just have to realize it. And I keep going back to the orchestra. I got to realize where I am. And every now and then I might have to step off that podium to rehearse a part with you and work on whatever we need to work on. But I need to remain on that podium conducting all the different parts so that we can make music. And by music, I mean make change.
Well, you're teaching in real time. Everything you said has been what I've perceived and what I've experienced over the years. And that's why I raised that question, because you represent how many people, roughly?
Almost 30,000 people.
Right. I represent about 115,000 people. And you're saying that with 30,000, and I understand exactly what that means.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that you that's 30,000 minds, or that's 30,000 perspectives. That's 30,000 places in life. It's 30,000 expectations, 30,000 perspective or perceptions. And to get that into something where everyone understands exactly what you're doing in the space that you are elected to represent is a challenge. I've found that a challenge throughout my entire legislative career.
Mm.
And it's not going to go away. It's part of the dynamic of it. Um, do you already know how you're going to deal with that?
I think this conversation is one of those ways. I
Yeah.
think the conversations that I'll be having with these constituents is one of those ways. Also, I'm very much so aware that in the words of one of my favorite Black liberationists, abolitionist Frederick Douglass, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. So if I'm dealing with someone who just will not wrap their minds around racism and why Black people are a quarter of the population, but 3/4 of the unhoused, unsheltered population, 3/4 of jails and arrests, and 3 times the poverty rate, 3 times unemployed. If you don't realize that at age 50 or 60 plus, I'm unsure if you'll ever realize that. And it's not my place. And I don't have the time or the energy to teach you. I just need to teach majority, which means 51%, which means 13 other people on council, and we make it law. And that's that. I've struggled with that because in the classroom, I never wanted a student to get left behind. And I always think about that student who has the greatest need first and foremost. Just like in my constituents, I think about the constituents who have the greatest need first and foremost. You got your constituents who are thriving, lowest priority for me. You got your constituents who are striving, they're in the middle, and then you got the ones who are just surviving, barely surviving and hanging on. They're at the top of the political priorities for me. But what I have to realize is you can't take everybody with you. And if people don't get what you're trying to do in office, they don't get it. And if it helps the collective and the people who need it the most, then it is what it is. And I'll say it here today. I've never said this publicly. If that means that I don't get reelected in 2025, then so be it. Because I would rather be in this office for who I am. I'd rather be in this office. I'd rather win for being myself than to lose. I'd rather lose being myself than to win being somebody else, if you get what I'm saying. I'd rather just be me. And if that means you need somebody else to come in here and talk fluffy and just kind of smile and shake hands and kiss babies, then I'm not your council person.
I think they call that integrity.
Mm.
I think that's a good trait, my friend. I think that's central to the whole process. Let me shift gears just a little bit. There's that dichotomy, sort of going back. I guess we still be in the same wheelhouse here. There's that dichotomy between Jecorey Arthur, who lives on a certain block in a certain house with a set of neighbors, who has relationships, social, political, economic, aspirational. You go right down the line throughout that neighborhood. You lived in the West all of your life, right? Mm-hmm. I've lived in the West all of my life. And Jecorey Arthur, who has to do what you just said, there's a dichotomy, there's a gap that you really don't have time to cure. How you deal with that? Or do you deal with that? I heard you just say, I'm going to be Jecorey Arthur. But that is a reality because there are people out there that you need to understand. You are part of the neighborhood. You are part of your community. You're sent to do a job, but you still go home to that house. You still deal with your neighbors. You still get ticked off if they don't clean the snow, stays there too long on your street. You still got to do what everybody else does in that neighborhood. How do you navigate that? Do you try?
So I define the word leadership by breaking the word up. Leadership is when you can lead a ship. And sometimes that ship might be teaching my toddler to use his potty.
Make me make another note here.
Sometimes it might be using the potty. Sometimes it might be teaching my students in the classroom about the difference between major and minor modes in music. Sometimes it might, be getting one of my students to graduate from Simmons College of Kentucky. Sometimes it might be getting my neighborhood to join the neighborhood association. Whatever you lead people, you can lead people to a destination.
Yeah.
And I bring up leadership because when you think of me, and when I think of me, first and foremost, outside of Metro Council, outside of making music, outside of anything, I'm a teacher. And being a teacher means I have a responsibility to educate people. And that means that I'm sitting, and we did this on the campaign, I'm sitting in homes. I'm sitting on people's porches, on people's couches, telling them what they might not want to hear, whether it's don't vote for me just because I'm Black. Don't vote for me just because I'm a Democrat. I don't want you to vote for me because I'm a Black politician. I want you to vote for me because I have Black politics. I'm having to do that education work because somebody, and I don't know if it's a mix between JCPS, a mix between the families who are striving and barely surviving, who don't have the time to do it, but somebody along the way in your journey did not teach you. Somebody throughout my life did not teach me. And I'm playing catch up with politics. I'm learning something every second, all the time. Every time you look at me, I'm reading an article or trying to figure out what I need to know. I'm reading case law. I'm trying to play catch up. And there are people 3 times my age who are nowhere near where I am in terms of political education. So a part of my duty, and going back to those 10 steps, is to make sure I'm educating our community about what needs to take place. Now, I'll say this, not everybody, just like I don't have the energy to bring everybody along, not everybody has the energy to come along. You know, you might got to focus on taking care of you and yours, and that is okay. But what's incredibly important is that you make it accessible. You meet people where they are, because there's no one size fits all for music education. And there's definitely no one size fits all for political education.
Well, here's what I want to do. I'm gonna shift just a little bit. This is I'm enjoying this exchange here. Let's talk about teaching. I have found that in teaching, I adjunct at the U of L about 10 years, and I think I was over Simmons 4 or 5 years. That was the most enjoyable thing that I can remember doing, is teaching someone that didn't know what I knew and watch them come along. And then I learned from the exchange as well, but the responsibility associated with it. I'm interested to know, is that your take on it? I mean, to me, I couldn't wait to get in front of those students. It was so enriching.
In my personal opinion, and I'm biased, I think the teacher has the most important job in the world, because you teach everybody else how to do their job.
Yeah.
And that teacher doesn't just mean you have an education degree or 2 like me. It means that you, like you just said, you're telling someone how to do something, in some cases why you need to do something, or how, you're breaking it down, a process for them. You're giving them structure. You're giving them a way to perceive the world and to figure out their way in the world, really. So I think a teacher is the most significant career, whether that's a certified teacher in JCPS, or you're a teacher that's adjunct, or you're, training someone on the job. You work for waste management, and you're trying to teach your crew how you go about being efficient when you go up Jefferson Street and you pick up people's waste. A teacher is necessary. And as our world moves forward, I strongly believe, as we see automation happen and production jobs get lost, retail jobs get lost, all of these jobs get lost to technology. You can't replace the teacher. I mean, you can try, but the teacher is unreplaceable. It's irreplaceable.
Well, we just found something else we agree on, and we don't pay teachers nearly enough. People say, well, teachers, it's an easy job. It's a very hard job. Preparation is incredible, but the responsibility is even greater. And I'm not sure you can pay a teacher enough, quite frankly, but we need to do better than what we're doing. Let me just put it that way. So do you have another creative piece in your pocket somewhere that you might want to expose to our listening audience? I certainly would invite it.
Man, let's do it. What were you saying?
What do you have? Go ahead.
So I'll throw you something. I had a concert series with the Kennedy Center, it's a historical musical institution, and they just kind of streamed me doing my thing in my living room. And I invited Sister Hannah Drake. I invited a singer known as Sierra Porter to come and perform with me. And I'll just play a little excerpt of something that we worked on. It's a piece about gentrification. What'd you say?
Hannah Drake, she's a home run. I
Yeah,
tell you.
that's the homie. So I'll just pull up real quick. Her speaking her piece on top of this track called Gentrification, and then a little bit of me rapping about gentrification.
Yeah.
It's difficult to stay are not our spaces. We are simply standing in borrowed time to entertain the master's masses. It is difficult to stand in these spaces and be me, fully me. Code switching my vernacular to make you feel comfortable. Why must my life dress itself up in discomfort for you to feel at ease? Why must my hair look a certain way in these spaces? Why is my gender an issue in these spaces? Why does my skin feel so heavy in these spaces? You see, these are spaces I no longer want to reside in. I do not enjoy being in these spaces. I no longer want to subject myself to these spaces, but then I am reminded as I stand in these spaces and I see the faces of these two little black girls watching me perform in awe. Because I'm a woman with kinky hair like them and skin that looks like theirs and lips that look like theirs, standing in these spaces. Spaces that have been designed in ways that have spoken to them at an early age, reminding them, baby, some spaces just ain't for your kind. You see that? It's why I'm in these spaces being a shout in these spaces. It is for every black person that has ever entered a room and wondered, would anyone look like them in these spaces? It is for every LGBTQ person that has wondered, could they safely be themselves?
So again, me being a fusionist, someone who's going to take different genres and merge them together. You had a hip hop instrumental, like trap music, modern day hip hop. You had Hannah Drake performing spoken word, being very intentional about the fact that segregation is real and it exists and it's still modern today. And then I'm playing a xylophone, like playing different scales from like the classical practice on top of all of that. That's me. That's what I do. That's what this world can be in terms of like, how do we break down barriers? And going back to what you said earlier, how do we collaborate? I knew my place. I knew I couldn't be too loud. I couldn't be too proud. I had to let her breathe. Sometimes I put in a little lick here that made sense and responded to her. And at the same time, you didn't see on cam, you had a DJ controlling the sounds and manipulating the instrumental. So we knew our place in that space.
So I want to give you the last word. What's your last word?
My last word, I will just wrap it up and say my mission in Louisville, Kentucky, my mission, period, is to end poverty.
Plain and simple. That's a massive, massive undertaking, my brother. That's massive. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't add anything to this for real. I want to thank Jecorey Arthur for sharing himself with us today. This was impactful. I got to do a shout out from my son Brandon to you because he's the one that put you on my radar. Who lives in New York, as you know. But I got to tell you that this has been very important exchange in my view, and I'm gonna have to have you back. I'm sorry,
Sure.
You can't come on once and something happens and I can't get you back because I've heard a lot of good stuff here, and a lot of wisdom. I'm sorry, I got to tell you, I did not expect what I heard. And I say that in a complimentary way. So ladies and gentlemen, our special guest, Jecorey Arthur, I want to make sure that you understand that the legislative process is not over. It's a difficult process. In fact, as Jecorey goes along a little bit, I'm gonna get him back on and maybe some others to describe that process.
Absolutely.
Because it's a mean process, but it's also what it is and it's necessary. So having said all of that, stay tuned for the next week as it relates to what we have to do in the legislature. We're going to sign off toward the end of March, and keep an eye on Jecorey Arthur because he's obviously a riser, and we're going to keep an eye on him. So as I always say when I sign off, do the right thing.